Shannon, this class has been hearing from some leaders of congregations and the lead of students at Goshen College, and they're all giving leadership to crossing human barriers. We're trying to become an intercultural church and to be welcoming to people who are from a variety of Spanish-speaking countries. Goshen College is close to 30% Hispanic in its student body, and the dean of students was here to talk about some of their experiences and challenges. And then our pastor, then Tina Slabaugh, pastor from Tucson, Arizona, came to us by Zoom. And there they worship, sing, and pray in Spanish, English, and Swahili. So we're working with that. And I observed that your book is at least first cousin to that struggle and trying to cross barriers. According to the reviewers, your latest book, which is only out a month, Start with Hello and Other Simple Ways to Live as Neighbors. You write about radical and realistic hospitality. You claim that we don't have to be detached and distracted and divided. We all long for community where we look out for each other. I would say there's a pretty deep sense of community in this Sunday school class. We hope that many in our congregation and beyond look out for each other. Shannon and her family live on the north side of Goshen. She's a wife, a parent of 4, a writer, a speaker, and for 2 days a week, she does the cooking at the window, which is our community's response to hunger in Goshen. I've invited her to bring her latest book along. Some of you may be thinking about, well, what do I give somebody who has everything? This is a Christmas present, so she has a few there in the bag, and my invitation to bring it. Welcome to Sojourners, Shannon Martin.
Yeah. Good morning. It's good to be here. I was telling Vic I spoke at the window banquet last night in this same building. I should have just brought my sleeping bag. I was here late last evening and back this morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Vic actually scheduled this little time together. I think he was my first official a calendar appointment for what has been part of the release of this book. He found me last May at the jail ministry banquet and approached me and said, when can we get you to come to our Sunday school class? And I remember, the book wasn't even released until October, and he was very ahead of the times there. So thank you so much for just being on top of that and inviting me to come to be with you today. My husband, Corey, some of you might know of Corey. He's the chaplain at the Elkhart County Jail. So it was his fundraising banquet where I spoke to Vic last spring. And now here we are, and the book is out, and it's snowing outside. These things change quickly. So I'm going to just read a passage from the New Testament. I'm going to give just a little bit of a reflection, share a little bit about my family, and then we're going to leave time for questions. It's possible, depending on how shy you all are with questions. I hope you feel free to ask me anything, but we will definitely get you out on time, if not a little early. But to give a little bit of background on me and my family, we moved to the Goshen community 11 years ago. And my husband grew up in the Wakarusa area. I grew up in southwestern Ohio, near Dayton, Ohio. I did actually just return from a trip to Newton, Kansas. So when I came back from Kansas and talked to my coworkers at the window, they were all saying, I realize we're sort of sibling communities with some of these Kansas communities. So I hadn't fully pieced together that many of you know somebody in that area, or maybe have even been to that area yourself. When my family moved to Goshen, I knew nobody in this community. I didn't have a single friend. I didn't have even really acquaintances in this community. We brought with us at the time our 3 young children who were preschool, just starting kindergarten, and just starting 2nd grade. Since the time of living in Goshen, we did bring our 4th child into our family. His name is Robert. And at the time that he became a part of our family, he was 19 years old. So all of our children did come to us through adoption, and he was, I would say, the most unexpected newcomer to our family. Now he is 28 years old and out of the house and with his family and working and living his life in Elkhart. They joined us on Friday evening for the free showing at the Goshen Theater. So that was a lot of fun to see grandkids and spend time together. But in my house, in the Chamberlain neighborhood of Goshen, I have 3 teenagers at home. So these young little ones that we brought with us to Goshen are now teenagers, eating a lot of food, working part-time jobs, very active in sports and orchestra and different activities. I have a senior in high school at Goshen High School, a sophomore in high school, and then an 8th grader at Bethany. So we're running a lot of different directions. We are very much in that season of our life. And I do spend my days writing. I am an author, and I am also, as Vic mentioned, a cook in the kitchen at the window. And I'm on staff there. I'm not a volunteer, but I am on staff there and thoroughly enjoy that work that I get to do. When we moved into our neighborhood in Goshen, I found myself asking the question, really for the first time, although I had been raised in a Christian family, as had Corey, we found ourselves really captivated by the question, why exactly does God seem to care so much that we love our neighbors? And who are our neighbors? And what does it really look like to love our neighbors? Is it enough to not hate our neighbors? That was sort of the question I was asking myself. Well, I don't hate my neighbors. Does that count as love? And so it propelled us on what is a journey that is still continuing, where we are continuing to ask those questions and to watch as those questions shift. So it went from, why does this matter so much, to who is my neighbor? And now, how do we do it? And those 3 questions represent my 3 books that are out in the world. So my first book, Falling Free, was the why does this matter question. My second book, The Ministry of Ordinary Places, is who is my neighbor? And this particular book that just released, Start with Hello, was sort of a compilation of answering the questions, how do we do this? It's the book I wish I had had 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It's a very practical field guide for how do we actually do this work of coming closer together in a world that is constantly trying to keep us divided. And I say this often because it's one of the truest things of my life. Anything that I know about living as a neighbor, anything I have learned, and I still have much to learn, but anything I have learned from my neighbors, particularly in the Chamberlain neighborhood, but across this community, and quite honestly, across my lifetime. I see a neighbor as anyone who we are rubbing shoulders with in any way. As Christ followers, I see neighbor as honestly the kingdom of God. But I specifically, in researching and doing my own study on what exactly is our neighbor, we think of the passage of the Good Samaritan, where Jesus, through storytelling and sharing a parable, gives us the answer. A neighbor is the one who draws near in mercy. So that does not mean that a neighbor is the one who is like me. The neighbor is not the one who expresses faith as I do. The neighbor is not the one who is most comfortable or familiar to me. The neighbor is not someone who shares my politics. A neighbor is one who draws near to me in mercy. And I am a neighbor when I am drawing near in mercy, particularly with people who are struggling in some way. I've also come to see that central to the idea of neighbor is that there has to be some reciprocity. A neighbor cannot be the one who is only giving. If I truly want to live as neighbors with my neighbors and with my community, we have to be taking turns giving and receiving. Because I landed in the neighborhood that I landed in, a neighborhood that is part of me now, a neighborhood that I deeply love, but it is a neighborhood where there is a lot of complexity. It is a neighborhood that is under-resourced and overlooked in many ways. Because of Corey's work, we have many, many people in our lives who are rebuilding after incarceration, struggling in many ways. My kids attended elementary school at Chamberlain Elementary, which is the elementary school with the highest level of poverty across the district that sees a high level of poverty. And so initially there was this idea that to be a neighbor meant to be always helping. And I would never have thought of it as trying to fix people or fix their problems, but I think that was in me somewhere. And so we had to do the work of kind of dismantling that in our own lives. And when we started to really believe that we were making long-lasting connections, that were turning into friendship and kinship, what we realized was that we were beginning to receive from the people around us. It has to go both ways. I was part of a community initiative just before the pandemic, so it ended rather abruptly. But I was part of a series of conversations, and we met together many, many hours in a little upstairs room in the Vista Community Health Building. And at one of those meetings, where actually I remember sitting and looking out, and as I looked out that window, I could see my own rooftop. I could see the roof of our home. So it's very close to where I live. And I glanced up, and on the wall was just a basic Xerox copy, like a very unfancy. It was somebody had typed this onto a computer and printed it off. It was not decorative. It was not pretty in any sense of the word. And it was the only decoration or the only item hanging in that room. And it said, ask for what you need, offer what you can. That, I believe, is the essence of living together as neighbors. We take turns asking for what we need, and we take turns offering what we can. Our needs will be different, but we will all have to show up needy if we want to live as neighbors. The things that we offer will also be different, and we have to be eager to receive whatever it is that is being offered to us. As we kind of found our place in our community, we had to make that shift. It can be very difficult to show up needy for a lot of the ways that we have just been taught and indoctrinated in Western American culture in particular. We are taught to be independent. We are taught to not value neediness. We had to find our way into that. We also found that it was difficult in some way to receive freely from people who so often we knew were struggling deeply in many ways. And so we just came to a point where we just started to say, yes, thank you, to anything that was offered to us, to really begin to receive freely from the people around us, because it wouldn't be fair that we, or people like us in this room even, would get to be the only ones who get to enjoy a life of generosity. We all want the same things. We all want to be trusted. We all want to be loved. We all want to be generous. We all want that experience of saving the day for somebody else. And so it's through that lens that I'm going to read just a short passage from scripture. Put my readers on for this. This comes from the book of Mark. And it's a story that's very familiar to probably most of us in this room. I'm going to go ahead and read it, and then I'll offer a couple of words after. This is Mark chapter 6, starting at verse 30. The apostles returned to Jesus from their ministry tour and told him all they had done and taught. Then Jesus said, let's go off by ourselves to a quiet place and rest a while. He said this because there were so many people coming and going that Jesus and his apostles didn't even have time to eat. So they left by boat for a quiet place where they could be alone. But many people recognized them and saw them leaving, and people from many towns ran ahead and along the shore and got there ahead of them. Jesus saw the huge crowd as he stepped from the boat, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. Late in the afternoon, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the nearby farms and villages and buy something to eat." But Jesus said to them, "You feed them." "With what?" they asked. "We'd have to work for months to earn enough money to buy food for all these people." "How much bread do you have?" Jesus asked. "Go and find out." They came back and reported, "We have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish." Then Jesus told the disciples to have the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of 50 or 100. Jesus took the 5 loaves and 2 fish, looked up toward heaven, and blessed them. Then, breaking the loaves into pieces, he kept giving the bread to the disciples so they could distribute it to the people. He also divided the fish for everyone to share. They all ate as much as they wanted, and afterward, the disciples picked up 12 baskets of leftover bread and fish. A total of 5,000 men and their families were fed from those loaves. What we see here is an example of Jesus giving us, through his very life, a roadmap for living together as neighbors. Jesus, as God incarnate, could have solved that problem of hunger in any number of miraculous and creative ways. But the way Jesus chose to solve that problem was to look at the humble people around him and say, "How much bread do you have? What do you have to offer?" And so we see through this story that we've heard so many times, this reciprocity of Jesus showing us the way to ask for what we need and to offer what we can. I'm going to go ahead and just read a short section out of Start with Hello. The font is a little bigger, so I don't think I need my readers for this. One of the things I'm thinking of in terms of this conversation of why does it matter, particularly right now in 2022 in Goshen, Indiana, why does it matter that we begin to draw closer to each other? Why does it matter in particular that we do get to know the people closest to us, our actual physical neighbors? I think so many of us, I think most of us, we buy a home in a particular place. We're drawn there by any number of reasons. People my age are often thinking about who has the best schools. Will I be safe in this community? Is it a home that I think is beautiful and will meet our needs? Am I close to work? Am I close to family? There are any number of reasons that we might choose to settle into a particular place. And we do. And then most of us live in a place that we have chosen without choosing to know the people closest to us. We live our lives disconnected from the people physically nearest to us. And it doesn't have to be that way. There was a woman who framed it very well for me once, but she said, on the best of days, and in particular on the worst of days, when crisis strikes, it is our physical neighbors who are closest to us and who often know what is happening, even before our family might know. It is our neighbors who see when an ambulance pulls up. It is our neighbors who notice the smoke and flames pouring from our rooftop. It is our neighbors who we are in closest proximity when we just need help. We should know these people near us, and it is never too late to start. I say often this doesn't mean that we should necessarily have to have the expectation that we're now going to go on vacations with our next door neighbors, although I think that could actually be fun. We'll see what happens. This is about just a basic, I know your face and name and you know mine. And I know that you have my back, and I know that you have, and you know that I have your back. One last note that I'll mention, because it's just coming to mind now before I read this section, then we'll have plenty of time for questions, as I've been doing media for the release of Start with Hello, and I did write about this even in the pages of this book, we are in a period of time right now that is unique in that people are flying actual flags from their actual yards that broadcast some of their values and beliefs. This is something that, though I grew up, my husband Corey and I actually both used to work in federal politics. I grew up in, I particularly grew up in a family that valued political engagement. But this is different. It's different to be in a situation where like flags are so visible. And I'll be honest, there's a home that until very recently was flying a flag that troubled me from their porch. And I also can tell you that I had a sign in my yard that troubled those same people. We were flying competing flags. And this is a relatively new experience for most of us. And so the question is, what do we do then? What do we do with these neighbors who we know from the outset, we fundamentally disagree? We fundamentally want to keep some distance between us. And all I come back to again and again is that those particular neighbors have had a meal around my table with me. They have been invited into my home for dinner, and they have said yes to that invitation. And so anything that comes after that, this was pre-flags from the porch railings. But I know for certain that if I needed them, they would have my back. And I believe they know for certain that if they needed me, I would have their back. And there's something disruptive and unsettling about that knowledge, because what it means is that even some of these bigger differences, those don't get to be our excuse. It means that while we may never completely agree on certain things, we have done that base level work, that disruptive work of saying, man, I don't understand this particular thing, but I know you. You've been in my home. You've eaten my food. These are the things that will ultimately bring us, even in those most difficult situations, those are the things that are going to get us through. So the answer to all of this, why does this matter? If I had to distill it down to one little word, I would say the answer is hope. And all of these conversations and all of this work to begin now, to take small, tiny, simple steps, trusting that they all count to live as neighbors, is because we are all desperate for a little more hope. And this is one way that we find it. So this is a section at the very end of the book in the last chapter titled Empathy Over Everything. I structured this book with 10 chapters. Maybe it'll be helpful to take down just a few of them, where I'm basically reframing the conversation. So chapter 1 is Awake Over Asleep, talking about the importance of paying attention wherever we are. Windows Over Mirrors, which is a chapter about seeking differences rather than seeking similarity. Open Door Over Perfect Decor. That's where we're talking about how do we invite people into our spaces when we often feel like what we have or who we are is not quite enough. I'm going to skip a few, but I write a chapter called Complexity Over Comfort. I think our iron grip on comfort is one of our biggest hurdles in this conversation. Tender over tough. Tenderness has received a bad image lately. We're taught to kind of look down on this idea of tenderness or sensitivity, being too sensitive. I think it's one of our biggest strengths that we have. Beginning to practice rather than just to preach. And then finally, the chapter Empathy Over Everything. Our empathy grows and hope arrives with it. The closer we get, the safer we are. The safer we are, the braver we get. We want to belong to each other, to believe it's possible, to know beneath our armor and in our skin that we can do this thing. We begin to believe we're up to the task of sharing space in this puzzling labyrinth of beliefs and best wishes. We can make it work. We don't have to carry on constantly baffled and half-hating each other. We don't have to accept a foreseeable future where people are grouped according to where they come from, how much they have, or who they know. We don't have to resign ourselves to a failed human experiment. We can write new hypotheses, watchful and steady, closed mouths and open doors, and put them to the test. Hope sounds so sweet, but it is a risky enterprise. In order for it to work, it has to be available to everyone, abundantly available, inexhaustibly available, as ubiquitous as clouds in the sky. Hope isn't just for the middle class or the decision makers. It wears no price tag and requires no password. Until everyone has hope, no one does. That's all I have. I welcome your questions. Is this a shy class?
It's a thoughtful class.
It's a thoughtful class. Yeah, I think that I understand that.
I've been a part of this congregation's prison reentry. I know your husband.
Okay.
And have often thought, I wonder who is the marvelous woman who can live with me. So it is a deep privilege and honor to meet you. And your magnificent presentation of ideas that touch every one of us. I'm thinking about my neighbors. I know their names, and that's all I know about them, except she walks a dog.
Yeah.
And I don't know the dog's name. So on many levels, you have spoken to me, and I'm overwhelmed to ask a question.
Yeah.
Because I need to process.
I understand.
And I will buy books. That's what something.
Listen, I won't turn it away. Yes, I can say Corey's involvement in jail ministry fundamentally reshaped our life. It bled into a lot of our everyday life, and I think it was always meant to. I think that was a good thing. I just this morning, they went off to church. We attend St. Mark's United Methodist, just a couple blocks away from where we live. And so they were all heading in that direction. And I had this thought this morning because I find myself thoughtful and reflective about these things a lot. One of the things we have come to do over time is to recognize that, first of all, at least half of the congregation at St. Mark's are incarcerated. They are living in the work release facility in my neighborhood. So they do have some freedom, but they are still incarcerated. And one of the things that we've discovered over time and through friendship with many of them is that they might get passes for certain things, but they don't necessarily have anywhere to spend those passes, particularly when many of them are recovering out of addiction. And most of the people in their lives are suffering addiction. So even if they have a place to go, it might not be a safe place to go. Even if they have a place that they want to go, they probably don't have means to get there. They don't drive, or they don't have a car, they don't have a license. So we've come to see the value of inviting people into our home on holidays. And that was the conversation Corey and I had this morning, because Thanksgiving is just around the corner. And saying, do you know of anybody who needs a place to come and have Thanksgiving lunch? So we had just a quick conversation as we were heading in opposite directions. And he said, well, I will make an announcement in church today and say, anybody who needs somewhere to spend Thanksgiving lunch, you are invited and welcome to join us in our home. And those kinds of practices have become very normal in our lives. But it struck me that, I have these 3 teenage kids who think nothing of this at this point. This is just the life that they have come to know and expect. And it's possible that this is not something that they would necessarily choose. I don't know. But they've learned to just roll with it. This is just normal to them. You know, if we said to them, which we don't, if we said to them, would you like us to invite a bunch of strangers into our home on Thanksgiving? They might say no to that, which is why we don't ask. But at their core, they know that this is just something our family does. And they're very roll with the punches about it. So that's going to be another encouragement I leave you is heading into the holidays to be looking around and noticing people who might be a little lonely or who might lack a place to be, who might just need some basic kindness. I think the holidays are such a natural time to reach out just a little bit more to the people around you. Show up with a plate of cookies, reintroduce yourself again. That's people come to expect that, a little more open to that during the holidays. There are just more opportunities to make those connections. So it doesn't have to be that you jump into inviting strangers to your holiday table, but taking those small steps as you see them, being awake to those opportunities and willing to step in. Anybody else? Yeah.
Was it Blizzard of '78 that got us introduced to our neighbors back and forth, and then after having lived in Elkhorn in that neighborhood for 1 year, that continued for 40 years.
Yeah.
And when surgery or other dependencies happened, they were at our door.
Yeah.
And we could be at theirs. Now we've moved to Goshen, Greencroft, and we're still getting to know our neighbors with our increased dependencies.
Right.
And that's good.
Yeah.
We're grateful. And thank you for reminding us to really make an effort to reach out.
Yeah.
And not to be concerned about superficial things.
Yeah. One of the ways when people will say to me, what if you could recommend one tip or one idea, what do I do? The answer I give is never the answer people want, but it's very effective. My answer is always ask for help. Go to the people beside you, and I'm not saying lie, but I am saying look really hard for something that they might be able to help you with. So it might be, in our case, we have medium-sized ladders. We don't have a really tall ladder, but guess who does? We know this now. And so Corey will go next door to Angel and say, could we borrow that very tall ladder? And they will come next door and say, could you give our daughter a ride tomorrow morning to a place that she needs to go? We take turns saying to each other, we'll be out of town for a few days or a week or longer. Could you grab our mail for us? Those are the things that over 11 years now have built trust between us. So there's a lot of difference between us, particularly a language barrier that our 12th grader, our senior in high school, the kids are all, their kids are very fluent in English, and Cal is becoming much more fluent in Spanish, and it's fun to watch those things happen. But us parents are still struggling in some ways. And so we trade plates of food. We spend every 4th of July together, and it's maybe a little awkward, just a little, because we have these differences, we have these language barriers, but we just keep showing up. We keep doing those things, making food for each other, sharing what we have, asking for help when we need it. And I think that's kind of the core, is that it's just a better way when we choose to live our actual everyday lives knowing that we belong in our place. It's not accidental, it's not haphazard, it's not inconsequential. To be able to look around us and say, I'm here in this place right now, and so are you. Let's figure out why that matters or what that means. It's a way of living that just makes me know that I belong in my place. This is my home, this is where I belong. Yeah.
So I thought you were gonna be the Martin who's the director of Greetings Wall. And
I'm not.
there's a different Martin. I'm gonna say Wall.
Here's the
Anyhow, My brother, he lives in state prison because of meth, and my father got arrested a few years ago for trying to kill somebody. So the jail ministry stuff is really important.
Yeah.
Glad your husband does that. And it's all for that, but I did text my neighbors and tell them I was learning about how to deal with bad neighbors in the church, and hopefully we can kind of get things better. My neighbors are Joanne Grant and Joe Springer, I think everybody knows them. Joe's flying home from Kenya, trying to get home today, but he's not really having success. And Joe and Joanne host a Christmas meal here at church,
Okay.
and 200 people maybe come, and then majority of them are not from the church, and it's just
Yeah,
like
it's wonderful.
have a spot to call international
Yes.
students. And it really works out well. She's a terrible professor, but she gave me a B. And I think
Yeah.
so she's a great neighbor. And so I'm glad I stumbled into the wrong job. It's been nice to meet you.
Thanks for doing this.
When our pastor talked about the efforts that Betty are making on the congregation to reach out across the language and cultural barriers, he said this was hard.
Yeah.
And so I think you're calling us and giving examples of hard work.
Yeah.
Do you care to share any attempts at additionally more failures?
Let me think for a minute. I mean, I don't know that anything really counts as a failure. That's one of the things that I've come to see differently. And I would say, Corey, especially in jail ministry, when you live in that world, and even just our lives becoming populated with people in that world, you see the fancy word for it is recidivism. You see this kind of revolving door that scholars and politicians try to decode. Why is it that people keep coming back to jail? And if that's true, does that mean jail ministry is a failure? I think that is the way the system was built. And we need to be looking really, we need to really be scrutinizing what is a very flawed and broken and unfair, unjust system. But there's also part of this where Corey was, you know, his ministry is exclusively funded by community members. And so some people were saying to him, well, is this money well spent? Because it looks like it might be failing. And the answer that we have come to see as true is that success is not about a particular outcome. Success is about our faithfulness to it. So what some people may see as a failure because folks keep returning to the jail, we see as an opportunity that anytime somebody returns to the jail or to our home, to our church, to our doorstep, that we would receive them with welcome and with joy and with open arms. And over time, it's those relationships that begin to chip away at some of the bigger and deeper problems. So the cop-out answer is, I don't think there's such a thing as a failure. I would say where I've seen a lot of growth in myself, so maybe we could say, I'm sure I came with plenty of built-in failures, was just beginning to shift my perspective away from, I need to do a thing. You know, we arrived in the neighborhood and I remember thinking, okay, here we are. It was a very dramatic story that landed us in the neighborhood, and a lot of emotions and a lot of people around us really struggling with our decisions, deeply struggling with our choices at that time. So there was some relational fallout. It was just a lot. But once we really settled in, my thought was, now what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to do something for the Lord, even. And I've just come to see that my job as a neighbor is to pay attention. It's not about doing a particular thing, because if we think too much in that realm, trying to kind of solve problems that nobody asked us to solve, we can cause harm in that. But to begin to reframe it as, I'm just a regular, ordinary, humble and doing my best person, living a really full life, often feeling like things are chaotic. You know, I'm all the things everybody is. I'm stressed out, I'm busy, I'm tired, not enough time, not enough resources. We're all kind of in that boat in one way or another. My job is to live that life do the best I can, and be awake and available to opportunities as they present themselves, to be needy and to help out. I think shifting that mindset and understanding and recognizing that I really arrived with some of that baggage. That's been a game changer. The last thing I'll say on a more practical note is people, we get nervous that we will be rejected in our attempts. We feel like going next door now just feels very awkward, maybe. Maybe we feel like, oh, I should know these people's names. I've lived here for 10 years and I don't know their names. It feels awkward to knock on the door now and say, hey, let's make an introduction. My answer to that is that there is no answer to awkwardness. It might be a little bit awkward, and that is something that we can survive. It's something we can all see in each other. When people, one of the things I try to do is put myself on the other side of that equation. If somebody showed up at my door just saying, hey, I should know you. I'm embarrassed, I don't remember your name. Can we just make that introduction again? I would only feel honored and grateful at that attempt. So just pushing past those ideas of what if we might be rejected? Well, it's possible. What if it might be awkward? Well, it probably will be a little bit, and that's okay. Those small steps still count.
I read, I don't know if it was your first book, Falling Free.
Okay.
And if I remember correctly, one of the things I admire about you and Corey is that you were quite intentional about moving to the neighborhood where you moved.
Yeah.
And of course, the challenge, not many of us live in such a neighborhood.
Yeah.
To be honest, very few of us do. And that's intentional too. So I admire you for doing that. Another note, I'm sure you're acquainted with Ruby Payne's
Yeah.
writings about poverty and the cyclical nature of sociological makeup and what almost seems to predestine people to live a certain
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
And that challenge then, of course, we see at the window, we see organizations where people are coming, food and technical. The challenge is, how do you keep your hope up and how do you stay motivated, I guess, to be Jesus calls us to be?
Part of that work for us, quite honestly, our oldest son, Robert, came from a lifetime of generational poverty. He's a Black 28-year-old man. So we have a very close seat to racism in our country and to systems that perpetuate racism in our country and the hurdles that those present. He came out of incarceration, but at a much younger age, he came out of foster care. He just, like, every kind of marker of trauma is present in his life. And we see him now making tremendous strides. That was the conversation we had with him and his family on Friday night. If we wanted to, we could continue to look at his life and say, what can we be hopeful about? This generational poverty stuff runs very deeply, and it impacts most areas of his life. But on the other side of that, we were able to have the conversation with him where he's saying people in his world, in his life, are always asking, can they live with him? Can he loan them money? That he's got people beating down his door. And I said to him, you are the most stable person most of your friends have ever known. And so we could look at him from our own perspective and think, my word, like, this is chaos. But in his world, he's really one of the more stable people in his world. And so there's two sides to this coin. And when I said that to him, I've said it often. I say it whenever I get the chance, because I think it reaffirms, it builds up that confidence in him. And when I said it this time, he looked at his girlfriend and said, that's what we were just talking about. We were just talking about that very thing. Like, they're starting to understand it. And I don't know what the solution is, but I know that we have learned to not hold our values up necessarily as the standard. I see in Robert, and you know, he lived with us for a time when he was on house arrest. He's lived with us a few times here and there. But we found ourselves living a life where we were choosing radical generosity. And then we watched him choosing radical generosity, and we were saying to him, stop doing that. And he would look back at us and say, but wait, I thought that's what you all do. I thought that's what you're telling us to do. And then we're there like, oh, shoot. So one of the things we see in impoverished communities is a real, true generosity that we have a lot to learn from. I would not be as inclined as Robert is to welcome people to live on my couch and sleep on my couch for months at a time. And there is an honest part of me that wishes he would stop saying yes to this, because it feels like it adds to the chaos of his life. But like I said, on the other side of that coin is this really beautiful example of the radical generosity of Jesus. So yeah, it's a battle between choosing to find hope, even when things look bleak or challenging, and choosing to trust that my answers are not the answers. We out of time. Does anybody have, yeah, any more questions?
Your last story might suggest that not only is poverty cyclical, but generosity can.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I would say poverty is cyclical, systemic, and so is wealth. You know, we're quick to point a finger to the symptoms of poverty, but we are not as quick to point to the symptoms of wealth. And that's where we have to do some work to figure out, to kind of reframe this, that this way that we have lived, that many of us have been born into this way. It's a different way, but it is not automatically a better way, because I think there are risks and benefits to both.
Will you write a book about the downside of being born into a wealthy family? That would be interesting to. But like, we have it here at church. There's a lot of generational wealth. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
I'm thankful, actually. I come from such a poor family that I don't know what that's like.
Yeah.
One of the problems, my grandma just had previously, she didn't have drinking water in the house.
Like within your house, there is.
Now we have plenty out of parts, yeah, but they come from flood housing apartments. But one thing we struggle with, like parents our age, and even in our block, is there'll be the Bethany bubble, and those kids sometimes here at church, and that couple Bethany families don't want to play with the public school families, and there's the conception of that's a rich family, that's not, and that's hard for kids to realize that that's not the case.
Yeah.
And I was on the other end of it, but I was the poor family, and my wife wears a sweatshirt I had in college, high school, because I was one of the kids that couldn't afford to go on a trip to Washington DC while everybody else could, and so that school bought me. But it's like, it's kind of odd for me to see it that
Yeah.
people view the Bethany bubble as like some rich kid that are out of touch with reality, but it's probably not.
Yeah.
And so that's hard for our church here, and it's hard for our neighborhood.
Yeah.
Those two, so it'd be interesting to have a book or something regarding that difference.
I know. I hate that you just said that to me, because you're the second person in 1 week who has said, oh, you should write about money. Sometimes I don't ever want to write about money. I keep writing about it a little bit, but it's terrifying to me. But I think the point is, I wish somebody else would write that book. I just don't want to do it. Yeah.
Generational wealth usually lasts 4 years. Generational poverty, you have a 5% chance of beating that. So if generational wealth lasts for 4 years, or 4 generations, and certain generations, you lose all the work ethic, the frugality, the saving, and the intentionalness with your money that the first generation and second generation had. So like, what's harder for kids? Teaching them to work and make money, or just paying for their car, paying for their college, paying for it's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah. I think myself included, I put myself in this camp. We tend to compare ourselves to people who have more as kind of like a, well, your kind of wealth is too much, my kind of wealth is just right. When we live and just associate with people who have much less than us, it gives us a very different perspective. The other thing I would say is that one of the things we wrestled through, and I hinted at this early on, but there was some real familial pain that came out of this for a time, because people could not understand why we would move our young children into the neighborhood that we moved them into, because there is a perception that poverty is dangerous. And that is simply not an accurate portrayal. So, 11 years later, our family has mostly settled down, like, okay, the kids are all right, things are all right. We feel abundantly safe in our community, abundantly safe in our community. And that's something that people from outside our community have trouble understanding. And the only solution to that, I think, is to come closer, to find ways in our regular lives to come closer to poverty, even to addiction, to all these things that kind of make us keep a safe distance, to find ways to come closer. So I think we are officially done. Thank you so much. I do have books. I brought a couple of my previous books, just a handful, and then I do have copies of Start with Hello, and come and find me if you'd like to buy a copy. Thank you so much.